Mind over matter, overcompensating, overstatements, crookedness relating, the soul's churn in return, mental overstimulation, one word, riveting, it terrors my pilot, streams that are promised to make seeking less.
Alex, tell me a bit about like the start of your journey of writing. And on the topic of that, because we were mentioning it before earlier about the idea of you coming into awareness of it,
yeah,
your purpose.
So in terms of my purpose or when writing started for me, it was more earlier stage of like teenage years, like say 13, around that time. That's when I really, because I was never the most expressive person. So, you know, as the body does, you figure out, you adapt, don't you? So you come up with an outlet. And so my thing was writing, so specifically poetry. And so over the years, I've just always been just kind of scribbling or just kind of creating things on paper. And just over time, that pretty much became my outlet. It kind of like this phase just come to me, emotional archive in a sense. You know, it's a form of me just kind of expressing how I felt about the world around me, as opposed to, you know, having somebody to converse with or finding somebody like that. And over time, it helped to mold me and kind of reflect some type of way of how I see myself as well as my surrounding, and I kind of matured from there.
So it was a way for you to talk to yourself. And when I say that, I'm not talking about the sort of common thing of sort of talking to oneself in terms of insanity. I'm talking about connecting with oneself.
Connect with oneself.
Yeah. And I would say that my own journey started later than yours. It came off the back of a couple of difficult life changes.
Yeah.
And it was the beginning of a journey into self-awareness for me, off the back of religion and the end of a marriage. And it was a form of therapy plus a way of connecting with other people. You know, people might not be able to connect with the exact circumstances, but everyone can connect with pain and overcoming.
Absolutely.
Whatever their challenges are. So I noticed that, like, you're a bit like me, you kind of do a lot of stuff that is introspective, and I would say a lot of people can appreciate some of the depth of some of your writing or thinking, and to others, sometimes being very introspective can come across as quite mysterious.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I get that sometimes. I think you have to, you know, we speak a lot since we've linked up today trying to figure things out.
Yeah.
We speak a lot about awareness, and I think, you know, in this sense, you kind of have to be aware of what it is, as opposed to what you'd like it to be, or, you know what I mean, whatever. But it's just like, with that come the idea that, and empathy.
Yeah.
And so understanding that as though, you know, sometimes I can be very mysterious. Sometimes I need to shed light on things that, you know, people might want answers to.
Yeah.
And being the person that we are, because a lot of to do poetry is asking questions.
Yeah.
You might gravitate to, you know, what somebody might want to know before they actually ask you. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
And so sometimes when you express yourself, you answer their question before they need to ask you. You get what I mean? So it's a combination of different things, I say, you know?
I almost see poetry sometimes in terms of answering a question before it's vocalized as almost like prophetic. Now, not in the most literal sense, of course, depending on what you understand of what that means.
Yeah.
But if you're seeking an answer and you read something, it gives you the answer about you consciously thinking of the answer or verbalizing it, then it's prophetic, and it's both quote unquote psychic, you know. And I think it's in the case of sort of the world, where reality provides you with an inspiration that actually is a piece of wisdom or a piece of fact that might be
Yeah.
That gives you an answer. But the problem is, I think modern day thinking is we're trained to think in such a way where we don't see the inspiration.
Yes.
We look at a lot of things very literally, and so I think that's good in some ways, but in some ways it stops us from seeing the inspiration. If all something is height, width and depth and colours, and something that may be very well represented by historical fact,
yes,
it still, even if it doesn't mean as parameters, it still is another kind of truth that's more introspective rather than something that's external to us.
Yes,
so that's a missing puzzle piece for me.
I mean, I can't too disagree with that, because in a sense it's like to just be to be confined to one thing. I think you're doing yourself a disjustice. Do you get what I mean? As opposed to just, because then, like, where does imagination fit into all this? Do you get what I mean? That's not nothing to do. For the most part, it's not necessarily reality. It's somewhat defined by reality. If you think about, like, say, a rapper, you know, it's a reflection of their reality. But when you think about some of the things they would say, it's out of this world. It's prolific, isn't it? It's just different. And so it just put you in a space where you have to pretty much kind of find some semblance of balance to your perspective on the world around you, whether it's time and space in itself, to kind of bring you into a space where you understand sometimes you can't see it, but it's there. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah. This is interesting because I know earlier we spoke about the idea of logic and it being difficult to apply logic to something that isn't necessarily there. Our five senses. I'm also going to extend that here because you touched on the imagination, and the idea of obviously the imagination not necessarily existing in terms of being real, but it being at the very least a tool that people use to try and bring into existence a life that they imagine for themselves, or a thing, or how do you join the two together? Because obviously at the very least the imagination is someone conceiving a reality within their own mind, and at the very most, depending on your belief system, imagination is actually taking something and trying to manifest it materially through and again magical or mystical means. There you go.
I know you're a fan of this whole mysticism situation.
I've got a different interpretation of what those things mean, and you do as well. So
my take on, especially when you talk about bringing things to fruition and all kind of different things like that, it's more relative towards universal laws as opposed to mysticism, in terms of like, and this is what somewhat experienced to an extent, because to a large degree a lot of things we say is more of, like, say, a lot of it can be argued is theoretical and somewhat proven, you know what I mean? So you have to kind of know how you somewhat draw the line somewhere. Do you get what I mean? But truth be told, a lot of the things that I say I believe in is more predicated on, say, universal law and all kind of different things that even when it comes to the mind. And I say that to say, when I think about what I want to be and what I'm aiming towards being, it all started with a flicker, in a sense. A decision. And from what I've experienced so far, it's like the universe is pretty much just everything that I'm looking for is gravitating towards me. Do you know what I mean? And that's not necessarily mysticism per se. It's just it's like I said, it's more. And don't get me wrong, I know there's a fine line, because some people say God, some say universe, etc., etc. Do you get what I mean? But there's a law in place, there's a system, and so I gravitate towards that as opposed to religion.
For some people those things are integrated, and some people they are siloed. I think first I want to ask you about what your definition curious to talk to you about this idea of universal laws and how you interpret that. Because I believe universal laws are experienced and felt by people, but they've been very hard to crystallize because there are so many interpretations of what they are from people who claim to have a solid definition of what they are. So claims rather than
I wouldn't say solid definition because I think to an extent everything is almost interchangeable. It's like there's always a lot of moving pieces. So to an extent you have to say everything with a pinch of salt because it's kind of like science. It's always evolving, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so we're always finding new ways to define or redefine things.
Yeah.
So at the time, it's like, this is where I'm at with it, and I can only give you the definition as far as I know it right here, right now. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah. I think when I said people have concrete ideas about what it is, what I'm really saying is there are certain spiritualists who say this is what it is. There are religious people who say this is what it is. There are atheists who say this is what it is.
Oh, you mean from
Yes,
in terms of like their own experience and their knowledge of things?
Religious text or scriptures. And then there's the idea, which I'm more in tune with, the idea that what we know as fact now, in 100 years' time, that might change. So there's almost like a dynamism to the idea of what universal laws are. We do understand universal laws, but our knowledge of it is limited. So I think things always change.
Yeah.
We're always on the horizon of some new understanding about something. If it's not an addition to our understanding, it's an increase in the depth of our understanding.
Yeah, that's understandable. I would say, for example, like my understanding of, say, like the universal laws is things like, say, visualization and just having a vision to begin with, actually seeing things in your mind. And I think this is where the fine line situation comes into play, where you see it in mind. Some would say mysticism, but I would say things come into fruition because I preordained it. And it's almost like I'm speaking. I'm gonna veer off a little bit, but it's almost like I dictate my own. I make my own fortunes.
Of course.
Do you get what I mean? I decide who I am, and I decide what I become.
I think here we need to define what I mean by mysticism and what you mean, so that will probably come things up.
Fair enough.
So if you go first, when I say mysticism or even the word magic, what does that mean to you?
It's pretty much like the unexplained, the mysterious, as we just spoke about. It's the things that we have no layman term answer for. Do you get what I mean? Where we're always wondering, but what is, but etc. Stuff like that. And so, if you don't have the information, though, that's where mysticism comes in to fill the blanks. In my experience, from what I've perceived, and so. I would say most of the time, it's the unexplained as opposed to labeling mysticism, where most people will just say mysticism and not necessarily give an answer or explain it. And I'm the type of person, I want to know what I'm dealing with. So that's why I don't necessarily subscribe too tough to mysticism as much, maybe as much as you do.
I think for me, the term, I don't have any like concrete beliefs about mysticism. It obviously refers to something that might be considered unknown or unclear. I believe mysticism is just the interpretation of something that we don't know a lot of now, at least based on our understanding of science, that we might know in the future. The same way that some people want to consider something supernatural now is considered part of science or physics, So that's how I see it. I think equally when we talk about magic, and obviously the idea of magic is also, there's an element of mystery to it.
Mystery.
I define magic as, I interchange the word magic with things like alchemy and transmutation, but I come from it from the sense of it's not necessarily a literal thing.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of classical philosophers use those words to describe the transmutation or the change of one element to the other. And what they mean, they usually refer to an inward journey of one's vibrational state of being, turning lead into gold. So I very much lean into that idea. And magic isn't like witches with casting spells. I think everyone has access to this idea of magic, because magic is simply creating something. You don't have to cast a spell or say an incantation or phrase. Actually, it starts here. By your will in bringing something into manifestation. And those so-called tools that people use, like prayer, witchcraft, those are just mediums that people use. And I think once we gain an understanding of the concept of magic in its fullest extent, those tools sort of start to fall away.
I agree.
Like,
So it goes back to what you said about the mysticism, and so you have to take that whole term with a pinch of salt, because you can only take it so far, especially when you speak to somebody that understands the world so much more, where they can explain a lot of things. Then the word mysticism becomes somewhat redundant.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's redundancy. I wouldn't say it was redundant, because I think there's always going to be a need for something that's mystical. I would say it takes on a different form, and maybe its scope in the world gets reduced, because you're right, there's this idea of maybe a progressive understanding of what something means or how to understand something. But I think that will take an extremely long time, if not ever, because as soon as we gain advancements in understanding of something that we consider phenomena, there's going to be something else. It's a bit like people discovering the atom and then they're now subatomic particles.
Here's a question for you though.
Go on.
If you know that you don't know the answer, you don't have the answer, but you know there's an explanation. Doesn't that somewhat belittle the term mysticism?
No, not in my opinion. And the reason why is because even if you have an answer and you can't explain it, someone else might be able to understand the answer or may not believe you. Therefore, if there's any signs that your answer is subjective, because you can't convince someone that it is what it is, then I would say some people would consider that mysticism. Now, whether that's the right thing to do, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but if you understand from their perspective, you're providing a subjective experience of something that they might be able to access, but even if they do, they might do it a completely different way.
But the thing is, right, this leads to my next question. Isn't there always somebody that don't fully grasp something?
I think there are levels to the idea of not fully grasping. So someone might not be able to grasp concepts that you do grasp, and then there's someone who may be able to understand things in a way that you don't. So I think there's always going to be misunderstanding. There's always going to be because, as I think you mentioned earlier before this, that there are levels and gradients. It's not that you understand everything, that there's someone who understands more than you. I think it's the idea that there's the awareness that there's something that's just beyond your grasp at this moment in time, that's at the horizon. So you may not know everything, but you know there's something more. I think that's the thing that keeps the magician going, the philosopher going, those that are concerned with knowledge, the Gnostic going, all these other.
I think you might agree with this, because, and maybe this is just me, my observation, but it's like I've noticed as the ages grow over time, in terms of like recorded history, certain things like mysticism, it becomes almost like a rule of thumb to not. It's less condoned. It's less exercised. Do you get what I mean? Because we have so much more answers. And I say this to say that I think men is pretty much, You know what? Let's say this let's take it with a pinch of salt.
Sure.
But there are a percentage out there that's evolved to a point where it's almost like a rule of thumb to not assume mysticism to explain a situation.
So, I think it's more than a rule of thumb. I think it's actually, in the last 100 to 150 years, that rule has applied. If you think about the Age of Enlightenment, the movement from people using religion to understand creation, and then moving to the Big Bang and science. So you're right, even philosophy today doesn't talk about the unknown or the explore or anything beyond the material. That's classical philosophy. Where you have people talking about the phenomena, us here, and the noumena, that unknown place of manifestation. That is not really talked about in today's the modern philosophy. So I agree with you. But at the same time, even though a lot of people don't like to admit it, a large chunk of the world still has some sort of belief system in a religion, and to be honest, they are practicing what we might call something that might be a bit mystic. It's just that if you were to tell them that, because they have their own boxes or things and they have their own idea of this is the truth, they would scorn at the idea of what they're doing is mysticism, even though you could say it is. It's just got a different name and a different dogma attached to it. And that's because of it's a closed box, because they've circled it around someone that says their mysticism is the truth, but anything else is either a lie or the devil or whatever. It's interesting,
But you see, I guess what I'm trying to get at is like, if you know what's in the closet, then you have a name for it. That's pretty much what mysticism is about. Do you get what I mean? And so I guess what I'm saying is, we might not know what the monster is in the closet.
But we know.
But we know somebody that knows what that is. Do you get what I mean? Or like who can pretty much explain or figure out how to unravel the whole mystery. I think that's where I'm trying to get at. So that's why I'll say the rule of thumb is to not assume mysticism, because and not only that, because history almost dictated that from the past, when that was the case, dangerous thing happened. People died. People got burned at the stake. You know what I mean? It's just like,
we're in a good place now in society. Well, we're in a better place. I don't want to say good. Where fortunately we have systems in place to match what people call mysticism. Some people might call that holistic thinking or practices.
Put a pin on that. Even for that, what you just said, right? So much has grown in terms of humanity because we veered away from mysticism. Don't you think that's a hint in itself?
So I'm not saying that it's a holy grail. I'm saying that in order for us to get to a place we are today, we have things that are considered holistic and some might call them mystical, alongside what we have like conventional modern medicine. So the two actually, we have access to two of those. And foundationally, people have an understanding that you start with modern medicine first. However, it also doesn't take away from the fact that a lot of people have recognized some of the values of some of these more holistic practices, but it doesn't mean they discard modern medicine, because there's truth in both camps. I think we're in the process of reconciling and working our way through that. So you're right that mysticism, there are loads of things that have been discarded with the idea of pure mysticism, and rightly so. But we can't say that without distilling the fact that mysticism is highly dependent upon the level of consciousness that those practitioners and the people around them center themselves with.
I agree with that. I can agree with that. So we're about to have some visitors. Yeah, sure.
We just keep recording and waiting and cut away.
I mean, Honestly, I can't disagree with that. I think I do agree with you. It's just the whole idea of mysticism, and I think it's just a bit dangerous. It's a dangerous path.
Yeah.
It can lead to so many things that we've seen. It's just dangerous or like harmful to people, and somewhat we've kind of outgrown it, and that's why I say, you know what, let me take that back, because we live in an age where, I'll be honest with you, it's almost like mysticism is becoming even more relevant when it's supposed to be even more irrelevant.
Well, this is what I was saying about somehow reconciling and wrestling with the idea of the unknown and what we currently know about reality or science. Because we went from one path of pure mysticism to pure science, and then we still realized there's something missing. So now there are these two strands. In the same way that, why is it that we go from being purely intellectual to understanding that it's not enough? There's like, intellectually you can perceive something, but you yourself, even when you're creating as a writer and as a philosopher, which I think you are, very much so. You acknowledge there's something else.
Well, let's be real though. As much as we do know, there's a lot that we don't.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it.
But that's where you have to draw the line when you're speaking about mysticism. The only reason why I say to take it back is because I understand there's a lot of people that don't seek knowledge, and that's why perhaps maybe that's what you were veering towards in terms of like mysticism always being relevant.
Yeah.
Because there's always going to be people that don't want to learn and understand, so they label things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's the people that do want to know. I think it's almost like a deflatable balloon in a sense. It's never gonna stand the test of time, where their culture thrives. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
Where knowledge is uplifted. You know what I mean? And put out there so people can understand the world around them. So, but at the same time, you know, this is reality, and this is what we have to kind of condone and understand. This is life. So I understand what you mean.
How do you describe that sort of almost like almost indescribable, fluid and sort of ineffable place that you draw inspiration from? I know we could say we draw inspiration from other creators, which we do, but also there's a feeling of something bigger than us as well that we struggle to describe, that provides us with a source of inspiration, a source of creativity. You know, I was touching on the idea of people having access to the idea of wisdom, even unconsciously, and it could be anyone regardless of what people believe of you morally or ethically, because it's a universal right or universal gift that we all have.
It's a few things that comes to mind when I think about it. Knowledge of self, knowledge of your environment, having a canvas and knowing what to do with it. Do you get what I mean? Subscribing to a certain frequency. You know, there's certain, or it be alignment with the universe. There's so many different ways, but I would say the biggest thing, the God in me. Do you get what I mean? And I think that starts with just acknowledgement of who you are and knowing oneself and growing with oneself.
I would say I really agree with that, the idea of your own personal power, and then come to an understanding of the God in you, or the divine in you, is actually the same thing that everyone has access to, individually and also, I would say, collectively, because we're not in a vacuum. And I think that the same inspiration you draw on is that which people draw on, but unfortunately they draw on from many systems which make it an external thing.
Yeah.
If something's external, you will never be in full alignment with it. There'll always be an air of powerlessness. It's like almost seeking someone else to lay your burdens on, this sort of messiah complex. Now, at the right frequency, someone who understands the idea of being a god unto themselves, like their higher selves, they will be able to take that with a level of maturity that they understand the idea of managing and controlling and owning their ego and the distinct bits of their personality.
Yeah.
Someone who has that knowledge and doesn't understand it, or is on a different frequency, may not, and they may abuse such a gift or personal power.
Yeah. Do you like your perspective on the world and the things that you subscribe to in terms of frequency and stuff like that? Do you think there's balance to your premise, the way you see the world?
When you say balance, I don't fully understand what you mean, so I'm going to interject and say perhaps what you mean, and you can say I'm right or wrong, is that balance comes in the form of that not everyone perceives everything the same and everyone's on the same frequency. I don't know if you can consider that balance. Why don't you can say to me what you're...
I guess I suppose I'm saying is like, if you take emotion and logic, like balance between the two, or like harmony, because with balance then next is harmony. So that's what I mean by balance, and just your outlook on the world, and as you go along and you learn and you label things with the ability to unpack it, obviously. Is there balance to the way you see things? Like, for example, even religion. Do you get what I mean? Stuff like that. Like, when you encapsulate it, is there balance?
I would say the best way for me to describe that, not necessarily the word balance, I would say an order. Like that order doesn't stay the same. It doesn't. It's not constant. It's not the same. It's not constant. That order.
It's interchangeable. It's a moving pieces.
Yes.
That's pretty much what I'm trying to get at, and just understanding that things don't really necessarily stand still.
No, they don't. The reality doesn't stand still. People try to make it stand still.
And just the knowledge of the world around you. So that's where. But I also, because you're quite the poet yourself, I really I'm curious about, what's your method of creativity? How do you go about doing what you do? Here's the question, is there like a specific method that you go about? Is it like flicking a switch? Or do you just let it happen? Does it just come to you? Is it organic just all the time?
Most of the time it's whatever comes to me, and I just start writing, and then I play with it there. Sometimes I have an intention to write something because I think it's important for me to get something out to the public consciousness. Now, it might mean that a lot of my writing is predicated or influenced by things I'm interested in, like philosophy, things like spiritualism, racism, asking questions about identity, sex, could be a number of things. And that forms part of the amalgamation of that. But ultimately, whenever I write, it's mostly on-spot inspiration. And then sometimes I have an intention to want to write something. And it doesn't always have to be introspective. It could be sitting on the train, and you can take something that's very mundane and everyday and make it really powerful, because you're not just looking at people, someone wearing a jeans jacket and a mother and child. You can take the emotions and the expressions and your observations, and you can form something that's quite profound.
Yes.
Because there's so much going on beneath the surface of these of those 3 dimensions.
Yeah. That's interesting. So what's your take on pertaining to your craft? What's your take on mastery of craft? With that being said,
the word master, I think, is just a stopgap.
Really?
I believe the word master is relative. In the same way that someone might be a master of a particular discipline, that's based on standards that set them apart from the majority of people in their industry or life. But it doesn't necessarily make them a master of their craft, because if reality is constantly moving, then how long can we really be a master? Also, if someone's a master now, in 500 years, are they a master of something? If things change and evolve so much, that's why I say yes, there are masters, but I think being a master is a relative title. It's relative.
I don't know. I think it depends on how you view it. I think, for example, if you're just talking about just the being accomplished, like say, oh man, I know how to throw a simile in the words together, stuff like that, and you just know the laws of language and how to kind of put it together. That's pretty much what I mean by a master. Now, when it comes to your environment and what you have around you and your expression of such, that's a different thing. And I think that has its own lane. But I suppose that's where I'm going from in terms of master. But when it comes to what we do, there's levels to this. And so, yes, you might master one level, but now you're at a new level. And now you need to master that one. So I guess what I'm just saying is like, the growth never stops. Do you get what I mean?
Which is why I said the word master is relative. So you can, at one level you are, one level you aren't. So, and that's okay. That's probably a good thing. I think if you're a writer or a poet, and say you're a master in English literature or constructing sentences in grammar, you are a master in one sense. It's true. But that doesn't, being a master at structuring sentences.
No. But I guess what I'm trying to say is,
it doesn't necessarily fully translate to be a poet. It's a foundational thing, in the sense that you've still got to breathe life into that construct.
But see, but that's another facet. I think that's another facet of mastery.
Well, let's look at this another way, because I'm not disagreeing with you. If there is such thing as mastery, say we tap into our higher selves. Very few people in reality can stay fully tapped into their higher selves. So you could look at it as we can retain the idea of master, or the title of master, but it might, because of the way the world is, it might be, the occurrence of it happening might be very probabilistic in nature. The idea of staying in source or your...
I mean, personally, I don't think it's the state that you should want to stay in all the time.
You can't in this world. You can't stay in that state all the time. Even because of the things in the world that we need to actually accomplish and in order to survive, not just survive in life, but certain social structures and societal structures and things we have to do in life. You can't, require you that you can't do that if you want to be staying ever present.
But what I'm trying to say is, I wouldn't advise anybody to stay in there.
I wouldn't advise anyone to be in that state, simply because of I would encapsulate the idea of for the best way of me putting it is, it's impractical to do that.
Yeah, it is.
So pragmatism, you can't. It's at odds with pragmatism, and the world requires pragmatism as well as idealism.
I wouldn't advise anybody to kind of wanting to stay in that state, because as we know, it's almost like a heightened state, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
And so after a while that becomes stress. It's not as you say, it's not practical to do to stay like that. So no, that's interesting though. That's interesting. But no, I'm just breaking it down in my head. The whole idea of mastering, and when I see it, when I think about just being a master of something, it's almost like having to fully grasp how to almost not manipulate, but coerce in a way that you can bring out life, you can make it, bring out the greatest potential out of it. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah. I wonder why you're hesitant to use the word manipulate, because in this sense it's not a negative connotation.
I think in terms of manipulate, that's next to mold, isn't it? So that's the way I see it. But if you're thinking about the truth and an expression in itself, I don't think manipulation should be in that. It just is. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you're just being.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be manipulate or coerce or something like that.
That's really interesting, the idea of just being. Because I have quite a controversial idea of applying the idea of just being and then the idea of knowledge. And it goes back to the days where I was a Christian person.
Yeah.
The idea of the concept that the perception of paradise, according to some in the text, was the idea of having no knowledge and then gaining knowledge, which I think there's something wrong with that, in the sense that if you're saying someone had an intuitive feel for what reality is but lacked the intellectual side of it, then I can understand the story. But if you're saying people had no awareness whatsoever of anything and they were denied knowledge, I think there's something wrong with that. So I always have this idea of interpreting the story of, at one point we had this sort of innate knowledge of something, called it intuition, connection to source, and then we somehow gained the idea of knowledge, and that in itself brought its own blessings and curses in the sense of how are we mature enough to apply it and use it. And so I've always believed that the culmination of that story and my own interpretation of it, religious person, is the idea when our intellectual understanding meets our intuition and our emotional maturity, and if you want to say spiritual maturity, matches our ability to apply that said knowledge. That's the union of what some people might label as blanket terms of masculine and feminine. It's the idea of, and I don't want to stray too far into this, the idea of images of, so depending on how you look at it, the synthesis of being divine or as God, or
That's interesting. Intuition and instinct. How do you think there's a commonality between the two?
I think there's an overlap without fully understanding the concepts, because I don't. I'm just telling you what my opinion is. I think they operate in two planes. I think instinct operates more on the plane of survival. I think intuition operates more on the plane of life, as in life in this term being a description of you living. So, okay, let me start again. There's a difference between surviving and living. Surviving meaning life or death or having your needs met, and living meaning basically anything that's over and above that in terms of living to your true desire or purpose. Because anyone can survive, they can eat, sleep. And
That's right. With that being said, survival. Do you have any anecdotes of going back to? Well, let me ask this first. Was there a time that your mentality was strictly based on survival?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we all tune into that at some points because of life. But I would say, and this is a bit controversial, I would almost say that large parts of my religious life was survival. And that I can say this because, according to my own understanding, living a certain life to avoid burning in hell for eternity is survival.
I can't disagree with that. I can't disagree with that. I mean, man's trying to save his peace because he might burn in hell. So fair enough.
Even though that's beyond life, it's still survival. It's even scarier because there's an unknown amount of time, and when someone uses the word eternity,
that's pretty much what I was asking for. I waited to kind of like have an idea of like an anecdotal type of experience of like when you had this idea of like survival premise in your head, like what did that look like for you?
Yeah. Well, even I can bring this to make this a bit more grounded. In my early 20s, I suffered with some major financial issues, debt. And I would say survival was at some points in my very early 20s was not having any gas or electric for 48 hours versus so I can't heat the house, but then making a choice between heating or eating. Yeah, so that's a more grounded version of survival.
I mean, you know, sometimes, and now it's like you're at this place compared to now where you're living. Like, what's the difference? What's the difference, do you think, between the two?
When I was in survival mode, I couldn't think of anything above and beyond the boundaries of surviving or making such foundational decisions. I didn't have the freedom to express myself in other ways and know myself. All I knew is what was required or needed. Whereas when I live, I now have the freedom of expression to understand myself, one, because of resources, limited sometimes as they were to express myself, and two, the escapism from such issues and problems, not being bound by them. And that in itself gives you the opportunity to learn more about yourself. So, it's a shame people's ability to learn is hindered by poverty, whether that's materially or emotionally because of structures or situations put in place.
And with that being said, how important now that you're living? Sometimes, Now that you're living, how important is essential evolution, growth? How important is that to you now?
I think it's pretty much essential to me. I'm not saying I live that all the time, because obviously I have a life, but it's essential. I've come to the realization that part of the reason why I made such life choices and experiences because I was searching for that was to answer some of those questions about growth being more than just going to work and going to nightclubs and so that's why I say it's foundation, and you've got to be prepared to go down the wrong rabbit hole for you and then realize and then go and explore another rabbit hole. You've got to be given the freedom of that choice, which unfortunately a lot of places that proclaim truth don't necessarily give you that freedom, or they do. They don't physically inhibit you, but they inhibit you in the mind.
Do you think there's certain rites of passage as a man, specifically because that's your experience? Do you think there's certain rites of passage as a man that you can't have certain experience or certain outlook on the world that is necessary, that you've been through, that you've experienced yourself?
I used to believe that there were certain rites of passages that were solely for men, and maybe there still are. A lot of the things I grew up with about being the man of the house, certain responsibilities, even the idea of, let's be honest and frank here, when you're of age, losing your virginity and things like that, those are all seen as rites of passage, and I used to completely buy into those things. But now I think, well, let's deal with the second one a bit later. Let's deal with the first one, being the man of the house and taking on responsibility. Yes, that is a rite of passage, but why is it just for the man? Because that can change depending on the circumstances you grew up in. This is an interesting one, and I think it's prevalent for me because I know that in my culture, and in fact, not just like Caribbean culture, I think in a lot of black and ethnic cultures, I think that the idea of responsibility in the household falls more on the woman than the man's in upbringing. Just from experience, some people might disagree, but from what I've observed from other people I know, there's a slight bias towards the sons of the families and daughters.
Well, as we know, when we talk about predominantly black family these days, you know, because of obvious situation, we live in a matriarchal type of household.
Yeah.
So by default, we have no choice. But you get to a certain stage in life as a man where you grow and you understand more of the world. And the question is, what do you do at that point? You know, for me personally, I think it is a choice. I mean, how can you not at this point in our evolution as human beings? Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
So it is a choice, but I think when you're thinking of, like, say, the role of a man, I think I do believe in the man being the leader of the household. Do you get what I mean? Yeah. I still believe in that. I think it's also important for a man.
I think it's important for a man to have responsibility, and most people would still say the man is the leader of the household. And I'm not going to disagree with that, but I also make space for the fact that doesn't work for everyone. Sometimes I think of it like this, like the reality is that the idea of...
But before you go there, why doesn't it work for everyone?
Because not everyone's the same, and not everyone buys into the same belief systems or ideologies or ways of living.
Yeah.
We think about the idea. Let's just talk about patriarchy, for example. Yeah.
Okay.
Most people in the Western world prescribe to it.
Yeah.
Our community prescribes to it. I think a hard pill to swallow is that there are a lot of, if you go back through history, that not necessarily every tribe in the motherland, for example, prescribe strictly to that practice of patriarchy. It's a lot more fluid than that, in that sense. But the idea of saying something's always been this way and it's absolutely right, it's not right. But I think there is something to be said about a particular structure, patriarchy, for example, within a context might be right in a context.
I'll just say this: it's not necessarily that I think it's right. I'm merely trying to figure out what works, like what's more effective for either party.
And this is necessary for humanity to wrestle with, because we're talking about not everything stays the same. So 3,000 years ago, I think perhaps more cultures adopted a matriarchal position, goddess worship, and then at some point in time there's father worship, God being the father, etc., etc. Now I think that idea is being wrestled with, the idea of someone coming out on top, but then that's the wrong way of looking at it. The idea of one having power over the other.
I wouldn't say necessarily having power. I'm merely saying. Remember what I said, leadership.
Yeah, but leadership is the correct term to use. But as long as when we talk about leadership, we don't mean authority. Do you lump them in the same category?
I mean, to be
authority, I mean authority over the other person in the relationship, as opposed to children.
No, I think I just mean leadership in terms of influence.
Okay.
So if you ask this person, you know what, it's best not to do this because such and such might happen.
Yeah.
And you expect them to kind of at least consider it.
Yeah.
Before and they can still say no.
Yeah.
So that to me that's leadership, because it's not forced. It's, you know what I mean? It's not coerced.
I would say there are certain things coming from male presence that are more effective than coming from a female presence in terms of discipline. Yeah. And I think that for many people or many women, there's still the idea of having a man who's strong. Now we can talk about what that means. In the addition to a man being strong in terms of being assertive, and someone else can lean on for support. Now there's the added idea of a man also having the emotional equipment to lead and provide support as well. And that's the growth that's happened. emotional awareness is actually a thing that's created this idea of there's room for fluidity in the idea of what is leadership between men and women.
Yeah.
But also that leadership dynamic extends to any type of relationship, because even in same-sex relations there's someone who takes on more of a masculine presence than a feminine presence, vice versa. So I think that emotional maturity or representation is the thing that's creating this fluidity. And I think the emotional thing is a necessary thing, because it's useless being a leader in the household but not providing emotional reassurance or not actually confronting your own emotions about something. That's quite vacuous.
Yeah, I think again, it for me personally, it's all about what works, what makes sense for either party.
I'm going to agree with you as well. So what works? So I agree with you that for ultimately, yes, you're right.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm just thinking about it. Yeah, man. How much time have we had? It's been an hour already.
It's been a good hour.
It's been a few hours. But no, man. It's been great. It's been great. Just chopping up everything, and I don't know. What's your take on the conversation and how things have been going so far?
I've loved the conversation. I always invite a space for expansion, and you're challenging me on various things, which is good. And it's difficult to meet people to have a conversation with. I don't look for conversations with people that agree with me on everything or at all. So I recognise wisdom as wisdom. That brings you towards a specific trajectory. And I recognise that many people have many different roads that path towards this trajectory. And sometimes it's okay to switch lanes as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm appreciative of the space.
Mind over matter, overcompensating, overstatements, crookedness related, a soul's churn in return, mental overstimulation, one word, riveting, it terrors my pilot, streams that are promised to make seeking less.